Father, Guru, God, and friend, I offer unto you my most humble pranams. Most respected greetings to all members of the Sri Sathya Sai Prasanthi Council, members of the Sri Sathya Sai Trust, members of the Sathya Sai International Organization, honorable dignitaries and officials. Om Sai Ram to our honorable guest speaker, Dr. Chandrasekhar Narayan. Greetings to all delegates to the Sri Sathya Sai World Youth Festival 2016. And Om Sai Ram, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the second session of Day 2 of this Sai World Youth Festival, and a special welcome to all 70 countries participating. Before we continue, to ensure the smooth sail of today's proceedings, a few house rules to abide by. Brothers and sisters, we ask that you turn off your mobiles as they interfere with the connectivity in the auditorium. Please refrain from stepping on the center carpet, as this has been reserved for the lotus feet of our Lord. Water refreshment stations are at the side of the hall. You are reminded that entry and exit points for males is at the front of the hall, females at the back or on the side. We ask that you maintain silence and Sai excellence during this presentation. Brothers and sisters, we have had a wonderful morning at Sai Kulwant Hall with the most beautiful bhajans and inspiring speakers. We continue in the same spirit. Today's program consists of inspirational speakers, presentations dealing with relevant topics and shared experiences to inspire and propel us in this journey of life. Our sweet Lord has said, modern youth are making every effort to know all that is happening in the world, but are making no effort to understand the fundamental truth of human life. No benefit accrues from acquiring such information that does not lead to the goal. There are thousands of intellectuals, scholars, and eminent educationalists in the world today, but all the worldly knowledge and skills will be a mere waste if one does not know oneself. The primary duty of man is to understand who he really is. Swami has constantly said, all my hopes are based on students, the youth. They are very dear to me. To get this first plenary session started, we have the opportunity of listening to Dr. Chandrasekhar Narayan. Dr. Narayan is presently the Director of Science and Technology at the IBM Research in San Jose, California. He is responsible for both fundamental and applied research and is a leader in managing innovation. He drives research in the areas of nanoscale science and engineering, nanoscale device integration, spin-based electronics, advanced material development and characterization, storage technologies, and computational material science. He is also responsible for driving innovation and has over 50 patents in his name. Dr. Narayan is involved in innovation in the areas of water, energy, environment, and healthcare. He has held research and management positions in IBM at both Almadin and Watson Research Laboratories. He has earned his Bachelor of Technology in Metallurgy from the Indian Institute of Technology and a Master of Science and PhD in Metallurgy and Material Engineering from the University of Lehigh in the United States. I hand you over to Dr. Narayan.
My pranams to Bhagavan Sri Sathya Sai Baba, pranams to elders in this audience, and greetings to brothers and sisters, particularly to the attendees of the 2016 Youth Festival from 69 countries. I would like to thank the Sathya International Organization and the organizers of the World Youth Festival for giving me this opportunity to speak before such an energizing audience. I'm indeed honored and I'm humbled at the same time. Om Sai Ram. The organizers of this festival, when they contacted me a couple of months ago, had a very, very specific request for a talk. They asked me to talk about the topic of sustainability. As you know, this topic of sustainability is very near and dear to Bhagavan's heart. And I'm indeed honored that I have the opportunity to share my thoughts on sustainability in Prasanthi Nilayam. There's no other place that's better for sharing my views on sustainability. So I want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity to address such an important topic that was near and dear to the Bhagavan's heart. So thank you again. So this topic or this discussion will be a little different from the topics discussions you have heard in the last couple of days in Sai Kulwant Auditorium. It's a little bit more technical in that the topic of sustainability has gone way beyond a philosophical discussion. And I think that's important to note because Swami realized this 50 years ago, this notion of sustainability, but the rest of the world is only now realizing how important it is. And finally, we are on the same page as Swami 50 years later. Very, very late, in my opinion. So I think the philosophical discussion about whether or not this is an important topic is no longer the case. The time for action has come. And I think we look forward to the millennial generation to actually cause that action for us. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why I feel so strongly the millennials have to be a very, very key set of players in taking our globe from where it is today to where it needs to be a few decades from now. So what you see on the screen here is my lab in Northern California. This is one of a dozen or so IBM research labs in the world, but one that is focused heavily on material science, which is actually key for addressing some of the global challenges. So in this lab, we have a set of scientists from all over the world. Actually, it's a very global lab in many ways. The scientists want to use their skills to address global challenges. Many people have asked me, why is IBM interested in working on science and technology for sustainability when that is not their business? The answer is actually very, very simple. As a research organization, our goals are not just to pursue the frontiers of science, but also to do things that are useful for the world. Addressing global challenges is one such thing that is absolutely important for any research organization to be spending some time on, not all the time, but at least some time on. More importantly, something very relevant to the millennial generation, and that is almost every millennial that I've met, including my kids, they always want to work on something that's useful for the world. Gone are the days when we do scientific research for the quest of science and writing papers. That's gone. This millennial generation is very focused on action, and action specifically in the case of sustainability. This is the topic that the millennials from the world over have actually joined hands, and that's why I'm really excited to address this topic in front of the millennial generation, where I think you can carry the torch forward and do the kinds of things which, I'm sorry to say, if you look at the adult population, meaning the parents' generation like mine, except for a few enlightened organizations like what you're seeing in front of you and a few others in the world, the parents' generation by far has been absent from the action stage in the sustainability space. And because of the inaction of my generation, the burden of sustainability has to fall on the... Which brings me to the topic that I want to talk about today. So, but the request that I've received from the organizers of the Youth Festival, I would have to get into some level of detail because, like I said, it's no longer time for philosophical discussion, but start to think about how and where to act to help save the planet that we're all part of, right? So this will be, like I said, a slightly different talk than you've heard in the past. Also, I will spend a little bit of time putting in place some facts to set the context for the kind of work that we all need to be doing going forward, so to show you where the pain points are today, and so we can address or focus our attention and our efforts on the areas that give us the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. So we need to understand where the pain points are in this global sustainability challenge and really spend our time and effort in working with our colleagues to address the pain points that are there before us. Out with some of Baba's quotes. So going back in time, he said, talked about the glory, our universe will be glorious if you learn to live in total harmony with the Lord. And I think this is a very important message because when he said Lord, he meant more than just the Lord. As you will see in his divine discourse later in 1993, he actually taught us exactly what he meant by God. He actually meant the God and nature and everything around us. So the notion of environment is already there in his teachings way back in time. So if you look at what we have before us, it's the gift that we have from God. It's this planet Earth. And in this planet Earth, we have an abundance of many, many things, all the way from trees and rivers and mountains to animals to plants to food. And the beauty of this is every one of these, as we call the ecosystem, are interdependent on each other. These are not isolated offerings or resources that we have, but everything is interconnected. What we are doing now in the planet is obviously having to dig into resources for life. And so this basic issue of denuding forests or creating cars and pumping gas from the energy creation, pumping oil from the ground, all of these things that we are having to do for sustaining our lives on the planet is something that we have been doing for many, many years. But in the last 50 years or so, this has become very much more of an accelerated problem because of pollution and everything else we are doing. We're starting to get concerned about the interdependencies in our ecosystem. And what is happening as some of these consumptions of resources in the earth are starting to happen is this delicate balance that is there within the ecosystem is starting to be exerting pressure, right? And I just wanted to put one of Swami's quotes way back down there. Look at the date, 50 years ago. He had already realized 50 years ago this notion of tread softly, move reverentially, and utilize gratefully was a message that we all should have gotten 50 years ago, but did not. And I think 50 years later, much of the scientific population, much of the youth are finally on this page. And I'm really excited that this moment has actually come when Swami's message from 50 years ago is actually now becoming a reality in terms of us understanding what he actually meant. And the beauty is, when he said this, most of the millennial generation was not even born. That's how much foresight he had if you look at the problems in the world today. So what is then our path forward, right? Given where we are today and all of the problems that we have caused on this planet, what's the resolution that we have here? So if you look at the kind of discussions that is there in the press, most of the people talk about reducing consumption. That looks fine on paper, but reducing consumption is hard to do in light of what's going on in the world as we try to lift many, many hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, give them basic electricity and water for consumption. We cannot not do that, right? So this notion of reduced consumption is embroiled in politics. And if you go back and look at what happened just 6 months ago in Paris, where we had the nations coming together in the global agreement, where India actually played a key role in that agreement, a lot of the discussion was not around whether or not we should reduce consumption. But the discussion was more around how we should reduce consumption and how much burden we should put on whom to reduce consumption. Because the whole notion of developing countries, developed countries, and underdeveloped countries, who should bear the brunt of the reduction campaign? That's where the discussion is. So I'm putting up this chart for an interesting reason, right? So if you look at the y-axis on the left, that is the CO2 that we are generating per capita in each of these countries. And if you look at the countries here, the biggest culprits are in the Middle East. Qatar is the worst, Kuwait, UAE, and then way in the bottom is Chad, Ethiopia, and Kenya. And the difference between the set of countries on the left and set of countries on the right is a factor of 1,000. Completely unconscionable factor. 1,000 is the factor between the consumption in terms of CO2 production between the poorer countries and the wealthy countries. This is really why the discussion has started. And to complicate matters even further, all the countries to the left of the center are where the population centers are already or are going to be increasing in the future generations to come. So the reduction of CO2 and other greenhouse gases has to necessarily also be shared by the poorer countries, even though we are starting to think about how to bring many, many people out of poverty and provide them with power, right? So this is the tension in the system, is the rich countries, even though they are the worst polluters, the population there is necessarily small. So they cannot really impact the global climate by reducing consumption a lot. Even though they're making the effort, you really cannot depend on them for global. So the global health has to be carried forward by the countries who are developing and bringing people out of poverty. So if you look at the data from the US, so this is the CO2 emissions. The yellow line on top is what would have happened if people did nothing in the Western developed world. Blue is the reality of what's happening today. The gap between the two is the effort that the countries are putting in to save greenhouse gases. You look at a country like India, it looks very different. So if you look at what happened in the Paris conference, this is what India committed to in this Paris conference 6 months ago. So you note a stark difference between what the Western world has committed to and what India is committing to. India is not committing to reduction. You cannot, because we have many, many people we are pulling out of poverty. The discussion in India and China is how to reduce the rate of increase. Very important concept for us, all of us to understand, is to reduction in the rate of increase and not actually a reduction in the total output of the country. So this is something we need to keep in the back of our minds in terms of what we should do going forward. So what can we do going forward, right? Given that the reduction of consumption is a very hard thing to practice in the developing world, we have to resort to many different things, like materials reuse, sustainable power, water reuse, desalination, very importantly, waste reduction. Unfortunately, all of these require some kind of technology, and this is where a lot of the effort has to be put in, is to understand how to invoke technology to do what we need to do. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is something very interesting, right? So if you look back on the teachings of the Bhagavan, this very beautiful book that was put out very recently, it says the 90 Divine Interactions. If you go to page 59, topic number 4, Bhagavan has said that you give importance to technology, which is nothing but trickology. So there is an underlying tension between technology and sustainability in many people's mind, and rightly so, because all of the things that we're doing today is because of technology. And so what Bhagavan said in terms of trickology has a lot of truth to it. But then what do we do? How do we go past this notion of technology being the reason why we are polluting? We have to go back to technology to see how we can fix it. It's like an antidote. The antidote for a snake bite is actually snake poison, right? So we have to collectively in this generation, the world going forward, we have to see how technology can be used as an antidote for technology itself. And this is really where the message is not to shun technology because we've already done the damage. So now we have to see how best we can correct all our actions. And we can do that only by looking at how technology can be used in very, very different ways. When I say very different ways, I mean reforestation is one. Electric cars, as you'll see a little later, is very, very important. Solar power is already booming around the world. So is wind energy. In fact, in India, wind energy is a big deal. And most importantly, plastics. Plastics, which is one of the gifts from technology, is one of the worst polluters in our environment today. And it's not easy to say, let's just not use plastic. I'll give you a scenario. The Nepal earthquake that happened very recently, many people, I was told yesterday, have to travel 6 hours a day to bring water from somewhere else. Now imagine what they would do if you tell them don't use plastic jugs but use metal. The poor people have to carry metal for 6 hours. So this is really not a solution of eliminating plastics, but trying to figure out what can we do with plastics that will help us in different ways without polluting. So this statement from Bhagavan shows the tension between technology and sustainability, which is why I'm saying we have to use what he has taught us and go further and see what else we can do to help the cause, knowing that technology is at the root of many of the problems in the past. So what we did in our lab, like I said, largely the people responsible for setting up this program were the millennial generation, which I'm very grateful to. We set up a program on sustainability which had 4 quadrants to it. We focused on water, we focused on energy, we focused on the environment, and we focused on healthcare. So today the topic is only on sustainability, and I'll briefly touch on environment, water, and energy just to make the case of what kinds of things we in this generation can actually do to help the cause. So let's start with energy. I'm putting up this very complex chart for a reason. So not that you have to read anything in this chart, but let me make a few interesting points in this chart. So this is what they call the flow of energy within any country. And the chart like this can be made for any country, and I would say it's not going to be that different. On the left, you have the various ways in which energy is produced today, whether it's solar, wind, coal, natural gas, nuclear, all of these things fall on the left. On the right in pink, not extreme right in the middle, are all the ways in which energy is used in the globe today. Residential uses, commercial uses, industrial uses, and transportation uses. The first thing that stands out is, if you look at the extreme right, shows you how much of the energy we produce is wasted as heat and how much is actually used to do useful work. 60% of the energy we use today is wasted. 60%. This is an unconscionable amount of energy that's wasted in the world today. And if you look at how the energy is produced, about 12% of electricity is produced by green, and over the next few decades, that will increase to a respectable number like 30 or 40% in the next decade or so. The other interesting thing to note is if you look at all the ways in which energy is used, focus on, for example, if you look at industrial uses, 80% of the energy is actually used in the industrial sector, which is really good, only 20% waste. On the other hand, if you look at transportation, and the reason why I'm bringing out transportation is transportation, 80% of the energy is wasted, exactly the opposite of an industrial segment. 80% of the energy in the internal combustion engine that we use today, for the most part, is actually wasted. This is actually a very pathetic sight to look at. All of the transportation we depend on, be it cars, trucks, buses, planes, trains, for the most part run on gas, on what in the US, here it's called petrol or diesel, right? So this is a very, very interesting topic because the internal combustion engine is only 13% efficient, which is why almost all the energy that goes into transportation is basically wasted as heat. So if I were to pick just one topic where the biggest impact to global sustainability can be made in the energy area, I would say it's the notion of bringing in electric cars. The notion of electric cars is very important because you no longer will waste the kind of energy that we are wasting in driving and transporting ourselves from one place to another. So transportation, I would say, is a focus. Now, many people will come up to you and say, that's actually that's stupid because you need electricity to charge cars and electricity is polluting. Then you need to go to the next level of detail to understand why it's not. And if you look at this, this is actually a chart that was put together by one of our buddies. He's actually a Nobel laureate in physics, Richard Burton. Source is Burton Richter. And he showed us why this notion of electricity charging cars is not as polluting as driving with gasoline. Is on the right, you'll see a little table. It's a little dated table, goes back to 2008 or 9, where it shows a case for the US, and you can make the same case for almost any country. 50% of the energy in the US in 2008 came from coal. So that is one of the worst ways in which you can produce energy. But on the left, he did a simple calculation to show that even if 50% of the energy is from coal, the electric cars will save about 40% in pollution. It's because of the makeup of the energy sources. Coal is the worst offender, then it's petrol or gasoline, and then all the other green forms of energy are substantially different in how they pollute, right? So if you look at the energy production in the world today, sources of electricity in 2008, this is the US chart. It shows, like I said, 50% from coal and the balance from green and other things like natural gas. But in 2015, just last year, it's already changed dramatically. It's gone from, the 50% has gone to 38% from coal, and the green has gone from 27 to 35, and natural gas is actually just about the same. So what this tells you is with time, the importance of electric vehicles will actually get better and better and better. Even today, it's 40% better. In 2015, it's already 50% better, and it's only going to get better. So if you were to focus on just one topic in energy, I would say try to see how you can bring electric cars into the fleet as soon as possible. There's enough technology in place today to do it in a pretty significant manner. So the specific project we're working on in our lab is looking at various battery technologies, because that is the single biggest source of issue in electric transportation is the range. Many electric cars have a range of just 100 to 200 kilometers, and people kind of compare it to petrol-driven cars where you can go 300, 400 kilometers on a single fill, right? So this is really the tension in the system, and that's why the need for a battery technology is actually very, very important today. And so the work that we're doing, we decided to focus just on the battery technology to see if we can actually impact it in a significant way. So if you look at all the charts here, the various technologies, the one that's used in all cars today for starting the cars is the lead-acid battery. It's one of the worst in what we call energy density, how much energy is stored per unit mass. So it's a metric of the efficiency of a battery to store energy in a small amount of volume or weight. If you go down the path, you'll come down to lithium-ion technology, which is kind of the technology of choice today for most cars, like the Nissan Leaf, the Chevy Volt, or the Tesla. They all use lithium-ion batteries today. But even that is not sufficient to give you the kind of range. So the technology that's around is what is called a metal air system. It's basically a technology where you interact with air just like gasoline engines, and you produce energy by oxidizing the metal. And if you look at the last portion in the chart, that shows you how efficient a metal air system is. It's almost 10 times as efficient as today's lithium-ion batteries. And this is amazing, because at the kind of energy densities you get to when you get to lithium-ion, lithium air, it's equal to that of gasoline, which means if this battery were to become a reality, you could even have airplanes driven off of batteries. That is really the goal of this, is to understand what kind of technologies you should work on to get to the ultimate holy grail of gasoline energy densities. One more. So this one shows you what actually happens in a metal air system. You pull in air or oxygen from the outside, you react it with the metals that you have in the system to create a new compound, which is an oxide of the metal. The beauty of this technology is at the night time when you want to recharge, what the battery puts out is oxygen. So you consume oxygen during the day and you generate oxygen during the night. So it's a completely closed-loop system in that you don't damage the oxygen balance in the environment. That's why we picked this technology to work on. Okay, let me shift my attention. So let me shift my focus to water, which is the other big pain point in the global sustainability space. So this is the map that I borrowed from one of the agencies, World Resource Institute, and it maps out the issues with stress, water stress in the world today. Because water by many is going to be viewed as the next oil. The next major wars in the world will probably be over water and not over oil as it was in the past. So water is a very, very precious resource, as we all know, and many countries are under water stress already. So this figure is a little deceptive because it shows that much of Africa is not under water stress. That's not the case. The reason why they don't show up in this is the consumption of water is very little because most people don't have access to water. Once you have access to water, this will look very, very different. The rate at which we're withdrawing water is very different from the rate at which it's being replenished by weather, by rain, etc. So there are many, many interesting technologies that can be brought to bear in the space of water. I just picked a few of them, and the focus areas. One is polymer materials. So plastics are polymer materials as membranes for treating water. So as you know, many of us now drink water from reverse osmosis systems and nanofiltration systems. But even today, reverse osmosis is an energy hog. The amount of energy that is needed to produce 1 cubic meter of water is still extremely large, and it's still not available to the masses. So we need to drop that cost by a factor of 10 before reverse osmosis becomes actually a viable technology for the masses in the world. To do that, the research has to be in the area of membranes that are used for reverse osmosis today. There are a number of interesting things one could do in membranes to completely change how energy and water are connected. What a lot of people don't quite realize is water and energy are very, very interdependent global resources. I'll give you an example in California. 30% of the energy in California is used to move water. As you know, California is a water-stressed state. So 1/3 of all the energy that is produced in the state is used to just move water from one place to the other. That's how interdependent energy and water are. And that number is typically the case for any water-stressed country, and India is no different. The other interesting thing one could do is we need to focus on removing toxic substances from water. Many people don't realize in the world that arsenic and fluorine are two very, very bad contaminants in water, and this is not man-made contaminants. It is contaminants from the geology. As we consume more water, the water table in the world is decreasing, and when the water table decreases, it's coming in contact with different geology, and arsenic contamination is becoming a major problem around the world. It's already a huge problem in Bangladesh and Northeast India, but increasingly in many parts of the globe, it's becoming a major issue, a health issue. So here is another instance where water and health are very tightly connected, is through arsenic contamination and fluorine contamination. And we can look at different membrane technologies to actually remove arsenic and fluorine from water. And finally, the notion of osmotic power is starting to be talked about. And what this is when you bring salt water and fresh water together, you can actually create power called osmotic power generation. And this is a technology that really has to be worked on, because fresh water could also mean wastewater. So we can take our wastewater and seawater and produce power by bringing the two together using osmotic technologies. Also, the notion of using nanotechnology to change the landscape of membranes for water is very, very real. Right? So there are many, many interesting technologies using polymers, nanoparticles, and self-assembled polymer technologies that can actually change the energetics of how water is produced. So in the reverse osmosis space, it is ripe for a lot of innovation in this area to help us create water at very, very low cost. And the last one I want to touch on is the notion of environment. Respect for the environment is something very, very hard for us to practice, given all the development that's going on around the industrialization, development, moving people out of poverty. It's a very hard thing to practice. So the notion of reuse and recycle has to be thought of in a slightly different way. If you look at all the waste that we are producing in the world today, so if you go back 10 years, and if you look at all the urban population centers across the world, the number is roughly 0.6 kilograms of waste per person. That's how much waste we're generating per day, per person, right? You look at it 10 years later today, and that number has already become 1.2. So the rate at which we're generating solid waste is tremendous. But look at the makeup of that waste. It's organic is the largest. That's not so much an issue because it's biodegradable. Metals are recycled fairly well. Aluminum cans are 100% recycled in many places today. Glass, no problem, metal is recycled. Paper, no problem, is biodegradable. The only one here in this chart is plastic. As I told you earlier in my talk, plastic is one of the biggest contaminants that we have in the world today, and we have to figure out a way of how to recycle plastic. And this is a no mean feat. And I'll tell you why it's such a hard problem, right? Let's take a look at the plastic bottles that people use for drinking water as an example, or things like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and other drinks in plastic bottles. They all come from petroleum sources. So if you look at the diagram on your left, you have petroleum sources used to make plastic bottles. And many of us dutifully take and try to recycle this plastic. Let me tell you what happens when you throw it in a recycle bin. It's not what you think is happening. In the recycling bin, so 73% is still not recycled, it goes to the waste. 27%, due to diligence from many of us, ends up in a recycling bin. From that recycled bin, 23 of the 27 is used to make carpets and other furniture, which also ends up in the landfill. So of the 100% that's generated, 96%, whether or not you recycle, ends up in a landfill today. So it's really not being recycled, even though we make the effort to try to recycle it. Nothing is recycled in the world today in plastics. They all end up in the landfill. So what you really need is a technology that helps you go from waste plastic back to starting materials. If you can do this, two interesting things happen. You no longer need petroleum sources to make plastic, and most importantly, the plastic cycle is self-closing, meaning you can go from plastic bottles, recycle back to plastic bottles. If you can actually do that effectively, then you've solved the plastic waste problem in the world today. So given the resources that we have, we picked one simple topic, and the topic we picked is plastic recycling. So we've spent about 10 years developing catalysis technology to recycle plastic bottles. And finally, in December of 2015, we developed a technology that completely 100% recycles plastic bottles. And this is a major breakthrough. And now we are working with major plastic consumers like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Nestle to get them to adopt the technology so they can use this technology and recycle plastic bottles so that we don't have this issue anymore. What we can also do is the waste plastic can be used to create other high-performance materials like airplanes and car bodies and membranes for filtration and so on. So using technology as an antidote for technology is very, very important. We need to rethink the role of technology in recycling. So what we have done is in the Science and Technology Organization in the research, we are trying to see ways in which we can protect the planet. And we picked 3 areas because we have limited resources in what we can apply. We picked batteries and energy because that's the single biggest pain point in the energy cycle or the energy flow in any country. We picked on water because we have enough competence in materials technology to try to see if we can make a dent in this notion of energy and water. And we're also tackling the biggest challenge in the environment, that is recycling of plastic, and we're hoping to actually make a difference in this space. And so with that, I want to leave you with Swami's message again. Jai Sai Ram.
Thank you, Dr. Narayana. How true it is that whatever actions we take must be useful and beneficial to all of mankind. It is imperative that the actions of this generation make a valuable contribution to sustainable global living. Yes, we have inherited a world plagued by problems, but what better opportunity than for us to start now as representatives of our several countries to action issues affecting global living. As Swami has said, it is youth and youth alone that can set the world right. Sai lions, just, courageous, and majestic. Brothers and sisters, we now move on to a very exciting presentation by delegates from the World Youth Festival. Swami, O Divine Lord, our Divine Master, we come to you with love and gratitude and humbly ask that you accept our offering. Today, we offer to Swami a special program put together by youth from South Africa, Mauritius, Malaysia, Australia, Hong Kong, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. This presentation raises pertinent issues affecting youth all over the world, including us as Sai youth. Brothers and sisters, we hope that you will find this presentation both thought-provoking and practical to implement in your daily lives.